Happy 250th birthday to us, my fellow Americans. What a wonderful reason to celebrate. A quarter of a millennium ago, the American experiment began in earnest with the Declaration of Independence from oppressive royal rule. No longer should the people of this place be lorded over by the rich and the powerful. The people would have their say, and the collective will would be the law of the land. This ideal was so inspiring that many others chose to come join this new nation, mostly the poor and the persecuted. To join a nation with freedom, particularly freedom of religion, was life-saving for those suffering religious persecution. The descendant of one such family, a Jewish woman named Emma Lazarus, celebrated the gift of American freedom by writing a poem, which was later inscribed upon the base of the Statue of Liberty. You will recognize the final verses. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Now, being Jewish, our poet, Ms. Lazarus, may or may not have recognized how these words of welcome echo the words of Jesus himself, who about 2,000 years ago extended a similar invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Those words felt like healing balm for the weary and the heavily burdened who found safety and welcome in the community of Jesus' followers, whose main priority was caring for the least of these as Jesus had taught them to do. Early Christians were very much like early Americans, mostly poor and desperate for a new life in a community with radically different values than the old ways. Now, if it sounds like I'm trying to conflate Christian teachings with American identity, fear not, I am not. The two must necessarily remain separate in accordance with the wisdom of our nation's founders and of Jesus himself. Faith, like love, cannot be mandated or legislated, and no good has ever come of collusion between church and state. In fact, that is what got Jesus killed. Fearful religious leaders collaborated with fearful state leaders to target Jesus, whose teachings challenged their authorities. When church gets mixed up with state, church tends to forget its guiding light. Now, this is not to say that you cannot be both a good Christian and a good American. You can, as long as you do not conflate the two identities. And you do have to decide which identity is your priority, should you ever need to choose, and hopefully you don't. But both identities require a certain commitment from those who claim them, and this is where I find some interesting parallels between Christianity and American identity. Both experiments began with lofty ideals that seemed quite revolutionary at the time. Equality was emphasized, and access to the resources needed for a good life. People from all walks of life were invited to join both movements, and the early Christians found themselves in a melting pot of diverse cultural, linguistic, socioeconomic backgrounds, much like what we learned about in our American history books. In the beginning, you had to really try to be part of these groups. You didn't just, say, get born into a Christian family. No, you chose it, leaving behind the religious identity in which you had been raised. You had to learn a new way of living, which was different from how your family had lived for as long as anyone could remember. Christians had to learn a new language of love and generosity and adopt the unfamiliar practice of solidarity with those outside of their family and tribe. Their commitment to the way of Jesus often put people at odds with their families, and they sought asylum within the safety of the church family. This is how it was for Christians in the beginning. In many ways, converting to Christianity was much like the experience of any immigrant to the shining shores of our homeland, leaving behind the familiar for the unknown, because the risk came with a bright promise. Come to me, all of you with heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Whether greeted by Lady Liberty or the body of Christ, The weary and the wretched were welcomed by something gracious and spacious, larger than life, bigger than any one person could ever be. To these new expressions of community, all were welcome and anyone could belong. What ideals to become part of a new nation or a new religious movement. Isn't it inspiring, the passion and commitment that go along with new beginnings? It is easy to elevate the early Christians and the early Americans as role models for us to emulate. They were heroes, right? From the Apostle Paul to Paul Revere, these are the people who have shaped our inheritance. And oh, how they struggled. The Apostle Paul, St. Paul some call him, confided in a pastoral letter to the first century church in Rome, "The desire to do good is inside of me, but I cannot do it." Snippets from his other pastoral letters reveal that the problem was not unique to him, Paul, but it was a common affliction among the various Christian communities he was pastoring. His letters acknowledge disagreements, factions, inequality among members. Our spiritual forebears were imperfect from the get-go. And if we're honest, so are we. As for our national heroes, history tells the tales. They claimed all men to have been created equal, but they didn't mean men with skin pigment. Our nation gained much wealth at the expense of enslaved Africans and acquired land at the cost of indigenous lives. And let's not even start in on the role of women who could not even vote until 1920 and who have only gained financial autonomy within the last 50 years. And our nation's welcome of the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses has been selective and even capricious, as any Japanese American can tell you. As it turns out, being a good American has required holding our own nation and its leaders accountable and demanding justice whenever it was denied. From the Civil War to McCarthyism to present struggles, our national story is one of persistence. We've been guided by the Constitution, whose authors attempted to create a document which could guide us for centuries to come. And did you know the Constitution lasted all of 2 years before the amendments began? It turns out that starting a new nation with ambitious goals would be a work in progress, and we the people should never become complacent. Meaning, we should know the principles upon which our country was founded. A dear friend of mine, history major, says quite seriously, all Americans must read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These are the writings that define our nation, and if we don't know them, then we can and probably will be manipulated by those who lie to us about what they say. The same can be said for Christians, can it? If we claim the Christian identity, then perhaps we ought to understand the teachings of Christ. And do we? Have we read our Bibles, or at the very least the Gospels, which describe the life and teachings of Christ? Because if we do not, then we are at the mercy of those who would tell us what it means to be a Christian, which may not be entirely true. Remember how greatly St. Paul himself struggled to follow the teachings, even though he knew what they were. How much harder then is it to follow the teachings when we are not clear on what the teachings are? Being a Christian comes with a certain responsibility if we listen to Jesus, who said, love your neighbor, love your enemy too, pray for those who persecute you, and give generously to all who ask. Give away your wealth and all of your excess to be shared with the poor. Forgive as many times as you have to. Humble yourself. Oh, Jesus said some hard things, and he knew it. He acknowledged that most of us would be unable to live up to the standards, which doesn't quite get us off the hook. We are meant to try, imperfectly as we might live into them. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, framed the goal as moving toward perfection, which is much more gracious, sort of like the ideal of forming a more perfect union. Perfection is not an attainable goal, but it is a necessary aspiration. So what do we need to perfect in our lives as Christians? And what do we need to perfect in our lives as Americans? And are these ideals in any way compatible? It seems to me that after 2,000 years of Christianity and 250 years of American identity, now is a good enough time as any to reflect upon the frameworks that we have allowed to define us, meaning to understand what they mean, not just what someone says they mean, and to understand our own responsibility and bearing the standard of either. So what does it mean in the year 2026 to declare that we are Christians, followers of Christ? What does it mean to call ourselves American? Is our nation still aspiring to be a place where peoples are welcomed and given access to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? Is our faith tradition still committed to serving the poor and the marginalized at tables of grace? Do we know our why? And does that inform our how and our what? What does the American flag represent? And what does the Christian cross represent? When we display either symbol, though preferably not together, do we bring honor to what either one originally meant? Happy 250th birthday, America. May God bless all of us, regardless of national identity and regardless of religious creed, as we continue the process of answering the question, who are we?